as you can see, it's dry now, and as I zoom in and focus on this, you can see that the where we've scraped and where we've pushed the excess plaster away, it looks quite even, it looks quite okay. The line that I can see there looks to me like it could be the pencil mark that we made earlier. In fact, I'm sure it is, as we're getting closer. It's actually the pencil mark that we used for cutting this. So, not to worry about that too much. I can see the join, but that's of course because I made the cut. Overall, I'm really happy with it. There's a limit to how much detail I'd like to give it, because from over here, from this distance, I can't see it at all, really. Almost. And that's only because the pencil is there. But the rest of it, I can't tell from the side. It looks like one continuous piece of plaster, and that's great. So I'm going to try it in situ now, because normally we wouldn't be looking at this really close up. We would normally have a particular field of vision, and we wouldn't be able to really even get this close, but as you can see, it does look like one continuous piece of plaster coving. The only thing I do notice is the gap between the roof and the plaster, which could be a bit of a nuisance if you wanted to carry on putting the coving around later. Wow, is that the 18? Wow, I haven't seen them in ages. And it's that elf. Wow, I haven't seen those in years. As you can see, the rest of the doll's house is unfinished generally. There's no skirting boards, and there's a few things to do here. But back to the coving anyway. The coving generally looks okay. If I get another piece in a moment, I'll just try to find another piece and stick it up here, you'll notice that the first thing that we see is that the level of the piece doesn't match the one on the fireplace. It's slightly higher. So if we were going to do this as a room, we'd have to make sure that we make note of that before we carry on. So I'm going to move out now into a different room, and we're going to start gluing and placing these things in situ into the room as you would if you were actually going to do it. So here we are. I'm getting my glue out. It's normal PVA, the usual stuff I used earlier. There's no thinning down of the glue, it's just simply straight out of the bottle. Applying it with a spatula and just buttering it on. I find that the best way to do this is to do it like this, is to just butter it on. Not to have too much, not to have too little. You need enough so that when you squeeze this onto the wall, there's enough to squidge into all the little holes and nooks and crannies and gaps and things, but not quite enough to squirt out of the sides and have to involve cleaning. I've selected a few pieces of plaster, and they're ready to go in. So once the first piece goes in, well, I have actually put one piece in earlier, but once the first piece goes in, generally it all comes together really quickly. So placing this into the actual corner, I'm going to put some pressure onto this, quite firm, and I'm going to try and squidge it around a little bit so that all the excess glue gets worked into that little corner. See, every corner, there's no guarantee that the corner is actually going to be square, perfectly square. So sometimes you might actually need to put enough force to break that plaster coving in the corner, just so it cracks, just so it fits the corner properly. That would be okay. It's easier to put the corners in first and then put the sides in. The corners are the ones that drive this, really. And sometimes you might find that some of the plaster parts that you put in, because the castings are not always going to be perfect, sometimes these castings can be too thick, too thin in places, so they fit better with other pieces than some others do. So you may need to try one, try another piece. I'm happy with this piece at the moment. That seems to fit well, it seems to sit well there, and I've glued it in place. And once you've glued it, obviously it will still be wet, so as long as you're not rough or shake this thing, it shouldn't come off. It should stay there and be fine. Middle pieces can be tricky because you are probably going to either need to extend one or cut one. In this case I need to make a slight cut because it's slightly too big. It's better to cut it too small than have it too big, because although you're aiming for the perfect fit, we can fill it in and that's no problem, but if you make a mistake and cut it a little bit too big, then it's going to be really difficult to cut that little piece off with your hand, with your fingers between your thumbs. You probably will end up needing to sand it, and if it's about 3mm thick that you need to sand, then you could be there for a while doing that, and it could make quite a bit of mess. So generally, just that tiniest bit too small is the perfect size, really. In this case I've measured this and it's probably about 1mm too small on either side. It's difficult to gauge, so don't worry if you do make a mistake. It's something that can be rectified. This side here has a problem because the parts don't seem to want to sit on this wall. The wall is either concave slightly, or there's some sort of glue or something preventing it from sitting flat. I find that by having two smaller pieces here, it actually sits a lot better than one long piece. Although one long piece, there's less joins to have to clean up after. But that looks a lot better there like that. Alternatively, there's another method for cleaning these up, and I'll show you in just a second. But as you can see, that did move there, so we know that there's some sort of problem with this wall or the ceiling. My guess could be that the corner, the actual join between the wall and the ceiling, might have some kind of debris in it, or perhaps a nail sticking out, or some kind of glue that makes it a little bit uneven. So what we can do in that case is to scrape the back of the plaster coving away. Just simply scrape it with a knife, so that we have a nice chamfer all the way down. It doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be even, it doesn't have to be particularly good. It just gives an empty space where perhaps it can sit easier. Additionally, also, it's going to allow some of the glue to flow into that. Oh dear, what you've got to remember is that these parts are really delicate. and when they do fall on the floor, they do break. They will shatter like porcelain. Although it's not dangerous, they're not sharp, it's a nuisance. So I've already put some coving into some of the rooms. I haven't tidied them up, I haven't filled them or cleaned them up yet, so they're just bare and raw. I'll do that later. But as you can see, they really do make the room come to life. It really does give that extra realism and warm feeling. It really does make such a big difference. This bit's a bit tricky because there's a staircase going up to the attic there, so I'm still undecided with that, how I'm going to finish it at the corner. This room, as we can see, I've got a piece protruding out, and that needs to be cut off. We'll cut that off in the same way that we cut the others. We will score it and then snap it. But because this is already glued on one side, the technique is that I put pressure on one side with my hand and just slightly clip it off. It does leave a slight jagged edge, but a little piece of sandpaper, perhaps a fine grain, something like a 200, would easily sand that down. And I don't expect it to be perfect. There will be a gap here and there, but that can be filled with paint. It's not a problem. Look how nice that looks. Just the profile itself, it's quite nice, and you can see that it's coming on really well. It's looking really nice. So I'm just going to finish off this room now, and because we're in an awkward corner here and I've put too much glue on this, the best way to get rid of excess glue is to scrape it off with something. I'm actually using I found that one of these plaster casts actually work quite well as a scraper. So if you have one that isn't very good, you can use it just for that. And again, we need to mark this one to place it. So it's mark it a little bit too small, score it, and snap it. So as you can see, there are gaps here that we need to fill, and we're going to fill these in the next video, because there's a slightly different technique that I'm going to use. It's not completely different, but you'll see in the next video. Bye for now.